Okay, I think we are live.
Yay, welcome everyone who's watching us on the live stream, and welcome everyone who's entering the Zoom room with us now.
Okay, I think we are live. Whoa, and there's feedback. Was that from you, Christina? Yeah. Okay. So, hello, welcome. Those of you who are with us, you can rename, and those of you on the YouTube, you can rename yourselves or say where you're calling in from. Where in the world are you today? Is it morning? Is it night for you? Hello, hello, hello. I see some people coming in. Welcome.
Yeah, even if you're bored of telling us all the time where you are, I'm really happy to hear. So if you want to share that in the chat. I'm saying hi from Thailand today.
How is Thailand? Warm,
It's
I imagine.
hot. From the Netherlands, hello and welcome. Norway, Perth, Australia, very different directions. Hello from Zurich. Nice to see how you're literally dialing in from all areas. Tel Aviv, nice. Hey Timmy, good to see you.
Hello to those of you that I know. I can see some people I know. It's great to be here with you. Hello, Holland, Liverpool. And this is day 3 already in the Reconnection week.
Yeah, it really went fast, didn't it?
And the whole theme of today will be around a little bit of difficulty around conflict. I can't wait.
The theme of the day is connection, and I'm kicking it off with how to get to deeper connection through conflict. In spite of conflict, we're seeing it actually as the doorway. Let's wait a little moment before we start. Just checking a couple more people. Hello to Germany. Hallo, herzlich willkommen. Hello from Okinawa. Oh, how nice. Yeah, I can imagine it's hot and humid, same as Thailand, but it's been like over 10 years that I've been there, or like 15 years that I went to Okinawa once. Hi from Taiwan. Yes. Sydney, Australia, present too, Ireland. Recently, people keep telling me I sound like an Irish person. I don't know what's that to do with it. I think it must be my partner rubbing off a little bit on me. And the way it makes, I am German, I'm admitting it. Got Russia in the house too. Hello, welcome. Belgium, New Zealand. Haven't quite made it down there yet. Slovakia, nice. Welcome, welcome. All right, exciting to see how many of you are dialing in.
All right, we're almost on time. So
you're more comfortable than German, Virginia.
I know. It's because I've been being taught by you and other German people for the last few months. So
I think I'm the
Very
least
welcome.
punctual German at the moment around. Daniela is way more punctual than me, I think.
Good skill to have. There we go. My clock says we're on the hour, so I'll start recording now. So officially welcome to this session about conflict as a doorway to deeper connection. And we're here with Christina Dohr. I'm so happy to have you, Christina. Christina is an embodiment and intimacy coach. She's a somatic educator. She does have an Aikido black belt. She guides people towards authentic expression and empowered relationships. She is also a passionate dancer with a background in social sciences. I'm Virginia. I'll be your host and tech host for this session. So any problems with the Zoom or the live stream, you can message me and I'll do my best to help out. You may wish to have headphones, especially if there are children around, and also to ensure confidentiality. If you're in the Zoom room with us, that means you're part of our embodiment dojo. It means you've purchased courses from us before, or you've bought this relationship course coming out. We'd love if you have your cameras on so Christina can also see you. It doesn't matter if you're walking, cooking, eating, stretching. We'd like to see you, and do be aware that if you're invited to talk, this session is being recorded and live streamed. This is your opportunity to think of one person that you know that you think could benefit from this. Think of one person that would thank you if you let them know about these events, if they need to have more fun, to have better boundaries, a deeper intimacy and connection in their relationship. The replays will be available over this weekend, so there is still time to invite them over. Well, don't invite them after this weekend because they'll be disappointed because they won't be able to see it. But do tell them when it's not too late, and it's not too late yet. We want as many people to benefit from this as possible, and we will be giving you a lot of free content as we have done already for this week. However, if you want to make a real change in your life and your relationship, 1 week is not enough. It takes time, it takes practice, and this is why we've got an 8-week empowered relationship course coming up. We got Christina here who's actually teaching on the course. So Christina, I'll let you say a few words about it instead.
Yeah. So one reason how this week came about was because we wanted to give you a bit more flavor of what we're doing, especially Adam and I, but also with the wider context of how you can approach relationships and create the relationships that are really fulfilling for yourself, and that through embodied tools and techniques. So especially Adam and I recorded an 8-week course for that, and we'll have live webinars and all sorts of extra beautiful handouts and tips and tricks and all the juicy kind of tools that we've learned over the years to share with you. So if you want to dive really deep, seek that out. I'll play a little video in a sec so you get a bit of a sense. Also of Adam, if you haven't watched him yet, he's a dear friend and colleague doing fun stuff with Togetherness in London and England. Maybe if you're in England, you've seen him at some festivals. But yeah, the main point being though that we want to make this available as much as we can. That's why we put on a free event now, and we really want to share that. But it's only 1 week, and these tools take practice and a maybe more structured approach to really integrate them and learn them. So if you're curious to really dive deeper, check it out. Might not be for you, but then I'd still invite you to make most of this week and do share it with a friend, because I get asked so many times after these events have finished and after the replays are not available anymore that people come to me like, oh, can we watch this? Can we watch this? And I'm like, yeah, you could have just a week ago. So I also don't have a say in that, how long it's available. So make sure to share it right now. And I'll quickly play the video so you get a sense of what I mean with the 8-week course as well. Let's see, figure out the tech here. All right. So
Have you ever found it hard to say what you're really feeling in one of your relationships?
Relationships are at the core of everything we do. Whether we're relating to a stranger, relating to our partners, it's all about relationships.
This is for you if you've ever struggled with saying what you really want or desire, communicating with your partner. This is for you if you want to learn to assert your boundaries in a clearer, more loving way.
It's about authentic, full expression and becoming confident in really dropping more into the essence of who you are.
The learning takes place in your body as well as in your mind, and it's super accessible for everyone.
Whatever your gender, your sexual orientation, if you want to have more fulfilling relationships, then this is for you.
Join me and Christina as we bring you a host of practical tools you can put to use straight away and watch your relationships flourish.
So just a little taste, so you also get to see Adam for a moment and be sure who he is. I'm sure you know him though. Maybe, maybe not. Otherwise, check him out. He's also teaching on this week. But about today, we are diving into the third day of this free event. And today is all about connections. And for me, over the years, I've worked a lot with having had a martial arts background, and especially in Aikido, with conflict and conflict resolution, or sometimes also it's called conflict transformation. I also do my best to slow down a little bit because I just had a cup of coffee and I noticed that I'm speaking quite fast. So I'll take a breath and slow down. But as you can tell, it's also a topic I'm really, really passionate about. So the element of conflict might be something that sounds daunting to most of you, that might have a kind of negative, bitter flavor if you think of it, and especially when it comes to relationships. And today, I hope that I can give you a little bit of a reframe, maybe a little bit of a radical view on conflict as well, and also offer you 3 powerful tools of how to transform conflict. And these are not like super complex and difficult tools, but really rather simple. So I'll give you a bit of the theory around conflict and then also the practical tips of how to start in and through your body in particular to get out of a conflict situation. Does that sound good to you? I'm curious, what is your first thought when you hear conflict? And share that in the chat with me. And if you're in the Zoom room with me, once more the invitation, switch on your camera. I'd love to see your faces. If you don't have a stable internet connection and that's impossible to you right now, then that's fine, but I'd really love to see you. Right, so when you hear conflict, Lynn says, ooh, it has to do with aggression. Yeah, everything getting chaotic, anxiety or fear. Run! Yeah, exactly, Melissa. It's like, it might be that impulse of like, I need to get the heck away, right? Avoid, exactly. Who else is like somebody that's rather staying away? As soon as you can sniff, there might be conflict coming up, yeah? Do you turn your back, you walk out the door again? You're like, oh, don't go home right now because there might be a difficult conversation waiting for me. Yeah. I'll be attacked and criticized. Yeah, exactly. Confusion, fear of losing terribly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have very similar, I used to have very similar connotations with that. So conflict would have to do with a stressful kind of situation, like friction, and maybe it can be painful or it can get loud or just a lot of frustration. And maybe there's some power struggle. It can be uncomfortable. Exactly. I'm seeing some of the other comments here as well on the stream now. Somebody already wrote growth, though. And that's the direction I want to go into today. So what I want to offer today is the perspective of conflict serving for growth in relationship. It can be a doorway for deeper intimacy. It can be like a starting point to really learn much more about your partner. Because oftentimes, and maybe also as a background, I used to do this mainly in an Aikido kind of context, and the philosophy of Aikido is very much about an understanding that we're all connected on some level. And that essentially, when I harm another, I'm harming myself. And I'm going to say a few more things about that. So when we get into a situation of conflict, what usually happens? What's your experience of conflict? You already said that the word itself brings up all these kind of thoughts and ideas. But when you find yourself in a moment of conflict, especially in your body, what do you notice in your own body? A rush of emotion. Yeah. What else? Maybe you can think back right now to a moment where you got into a fight with somebody or a disagreement. A tightening of the gut. Right. Yeah. Wait for a couple more responses. Really try to remember and bring yourself into the memory of your body responses, physiological kind of. A polarized right-wrong thinking. Yeah. So not only in the physical sensation part of our being, but also our brains literally change, right? It's like they're only black and white. It's right or wrong. Yeah, it's either my side or no side. Yeah. Bracing of the chest, a lot of tension. No breathing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what you're describing is generally a fight-flight response. Now, most of you might be familiar with the fight-flight idea and how our nervous system in a situation that's interpreted as a threat can kick from like our normal mode of being into a much more older part of our brain, the limbic system. The amygdala gets activated. There's much more of the emotional, the reactive kind of way of being present. And we can tip into that contraction that either we want to run away or we want to be ready to defend ourselves and attack against the attack that we're expecting. So yeah, the fight, flight, freeze, fold. But especially fight, flight in conflict. It's either I'm like, I'm out of here, I don't want to deal with this. If somebody walks up to you and goes, we need to talk. That's probably the best way of accessing your emotional or physiological response. It's like, I'm gonna go. Or maybe like you're gearing up and get ready to defend because you're expecting the attack, right? Yeah, there's an urge to protect. And that's where the problem starts. Because on some level, conflict is fun, isn't it? On one hand, yeah, you want to get away from it. But at the same time, if you're in a fight, have you ever experienced this like surge of energy and like feeling much more like geared up and awake, and maybe your heart beats faster and like start feeling really awake, and maybe the anger that comes with it as well. And like there's something that I compare to games, that I can only compare to competition. Because in the end, conflict is also a little bit like a game of tennis, or maybe even ping pong, because it can go really, really fast. And there's a similar unfolding of that. Can you imagine what I mean when I say like a conflict can also be exactly like a game of tennis or a game of ping pong? Yeah. So there's an idea of simply taking two positions. And I love to play this game. And I learned that back then with a teacher of mine, an Aikido teacher, Patrick Cassidy. It's simply playing a yes and no game. And that's kind of the ping pong of conflict. And it's imagine you're going to just take a position of yes. And that's all you're supposed to do, to say yes. And I would meet you saying no. And we would simply go back and forth and back and forth. I'd really love to play this with you right now, but I think on this digital medium, it's a bit more difficult. But I can tell you what usually happens. What happens is that even though there's nothing at stake, And there's really nothing behind this. There's no possible reason or no, my yes doesn't come with an entire story. It's literally just these two words. Every person I've seen play this, and also in myself, there is a competition that kicks off. There is like a kind of game-like determination, a kind of yearning to win. This sort of like, I'm going to stick with my yes, and I'm going to get through with my yes. And it becomes this game. And what happens? It's not only a back and forth, like the tennis, but there's also a movement of intensification. One person says, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And you're kind of escalating. And that's where it becomes tricky. That's where we increasingly lose a sense of what makes sense. The sense of what even rationally we were talking about potentially. Because there's on one hand, there's an enjoyment, not necessarily a cognitive enjoyment, but an enjoyment of that dynamic. Because it is like a game, because it is that sort of, all right, it makes me feel alive, it makes me feel awake, there's something at stake here. And even if there's nothing at stake, it pulls us in. And I haven't met a lot of people, even though they say they're not competitive, that don't fall for that don't automatically go into, but I'm the no, and I'm suddenly taking on the no, and no is my position. No one's gonna make me budge from that. And there's this escalation that happens. And this is where conflict can become tricky, because if you escalate too much, it eventually might get violent. So the point right now is to find a way to not let it escalate so far that there's no thinking possible anymore, that the relationship gets harmed. But to find a way to come back down from that ladder, to calm down in some way. But not by telling each other, calm the fuck down, like you're screaming at me, because that's, again, it's oil into the fire. That's the exact same thing. It might not be yes and no, but it might suddenly be, well, you're the one screaming at me. No, but you're the one. And what it is actually about is often not the words. Because as it's really visible in that example of yes and no, there's nothing behind the yes and no. And yet we become so invested. And that's one of the main problems. The need to be right, the need to defend the position you take, and to really want to be kind of like acknowledged in that, and to win, and to hold on frantically to that position. And there's a saying that you'd rather be right than happy, and that is so true. We seek for that kind of holding on to, because it gets confused with a component of our identity. If I suddenly get convinced of the other position, that might challenge who I think I am, because then I'd be wrong. And what does that say about me? And there's an entanglement that happens with not just having an opinion, but the opinion becoming who I am. So there's that element of taking it really personally, because suddenly my standpoint becomes a factor that addresses my very being. And I get hardened around that position then. So yeah, so we have this escalation happening. And I also spoke, you already shared what you notice in your own body happening then. And I mentioned a few things, the acceleration of heartbeat, maybe the kind of breath, either holding of breath, or very much the symptoms we can detect in a fight-flight response. What conflict serves underneath that though, when we don't get lost in the escalation and then get so frustrated and just pin ourselves against each other, is actually a level of seeking connection oftentimes, seeking understanding, negotiating maybe boundaries, testing boundaries, developing a deeper understanding of the person you're fighting with. Because in the end, it's about having maybe opposing beliefs on something, having opposing opinions on something. And that can lead to this heading, but we can also take it as an opportunity to deepen into understanding and to the need underneath is often just to be heard in it, to be acknowledged in it, to be seen in it, and to have respect When I find myself in a fight, what's often underneath my whatever ideas, opinions that are clashing is a need to want to be seen by the other, to really want to be heard and to connect. But how do we get to that? How do we get away from escalation and away from that kind of getting stuck in our heads and getting so entangled in the kind of suddenly my opinion becomes my identity? To start off with, I recommend centering. But even before centering, there's something much more powerful and much simpler. That's listening. Because what happens in a conflict situation, we completely stop listening to the other person usually. I mean, maybe some of you really, really take in what your partner is saying in a fight still, but I would argue that most of us are already busy constructing our counter argument while we're listening to the other, and only picking out things that we can latch onto to use and recycle in our rebut. And there's no actual acknowledging or no actual hearing of what the other is expressing. There's an invalidation almost of that. It doesn't even land. But because it's so hard to sometimes in that moment really listen when you're in your head going, but, the first step of listening is actually to listen to yourself. And we can do this right now. And this can be something you could practice at home in the form of a check-in. And the more often you do this, the easier it'll become, especially in moments of conflict, to start to listen to your own system. I call it system because there are different levels involved. And we can do that now for a moment, even with the eyes closed if you want. Listen in a more metaphorical sense, paying attention, tuning in, noticing the sensations present in your body. Noticing your feet on the ground, your bum on the chair, any part of your body that's in contact with the ground. Notice your breath. Notice any tension. And that's the physiological level. The next to that is the emotional quality. And in a moment of fight, it might be something like anger or frustration or sadness. The clearer we can get on that in a very moment of argument, the more it helps us to step away from getting entangled too much in it and to escalate too much. Right now, you might have a different emotion that's present with you, but what would it be? And sometimes it helps to retreat back to metaphors here, and you could say, what's the flavor? Or what's the smell of your emotional tone right now? Or become a bit more abstract, the color of it. Because it can also be difficult to understand what's the emotion I'm feeling right now. And if it's difficult to know, you could come back to the sensations. It could simply be, wow, I feel this contraction in my stomach. And it could mean that I'm angry. It could mean that I'm excited. It could mean that I'm nervous. It could mean that all these different things. So dialing it back, if you struggle identifying the emotion, is always a good idea. And then in moments of conflict, listening to self is also listening to your own voice. So in the example of yes and no, for instance, it'd be, let's say I'm with the no, and I'd keep listening to that. Keep listening to me saying no, no. I'm not trying to change it. I'm not trying to influence or manipulate how I speak, but I become aware of my tone of voice, of the words I'm saying. I kind of take a little step back and become the observer for a moment. That's step number 1 of listening. Step number 2 would be listening to the other. So from that place of being really fully aware of myself, my physical, emotional, and also my mental space, I can then move out and start listening to the other. And there's still no need to agree, and that's the important bit. It's only about listening. You don't need to immediately take on their opinion. Not at all. You might go through the entire conflict and you come out at the other end still disagreeing. But start to listen. And listening also in a broader sense of taking them in, seeing them, looking into their face, looking at their posture, noticing how they are breathing. And then their tone of voice. And maybe you could already add a little component of simply acknowledging that whatever they are sharing is important to them. It doesn't mean, once again, that you agree, but acknowledging that it matters to them. They're invested in it. And if it's somebody you care about, you can care about them caring, even if you disagree. And step number 3 in listening is almost expanding that a little bit more. It would be still listening to yourself, still listening to the other, but then almost imagining that there's something bigger that encapsulates both of you, which is the relationship. And the relationship in this moment is what you would want to protect. Not you, not your beliefs, not your ideas, not your identity. That's not threatened. If a conflict escalates beyond a certain point, what becomes threatened, so to say, is actually the relationship. That is what could take some harm or some rupture, a destructive impact. If you keep so stagnant and stuck in your opinions and battling, and that's all you care about in that moment, it might very well lead to the relationship getting some scratches and an impact. So becoming aware of that there is this thing that connects you. And here we talk about relationships. So it's people you know generally, but this even works with strangers. Focusing on the things that do connect you. Focusing on the similarities. Focusing on maybe even just the desire to want to be in connection with the other person. And then the conflict, that escalation, is something that happens on the surface. It's more like the little waves and ripples on top of the ocean. But what you're focusing on then is dropping these few levels deeper and diving underwater and remembering that there's something here that connects you. In the Aikido, it's an initial movement that starts off something. It comes from like opposing each other to the point of turning in the same direction as your so-called opponent. It's remembering that there is a common direction. And then I can stay with my no, for instance. I can still keep saying no, but it will come from a very different place. It will come from that place of, actually, no, and I love you. And the example is often that we have these sort of ability with, often parents have that with their children. It doesn't mean that just because you say no to your kid wanting a lollipop or whatever, you don't love it, right? But what can happen in romantic relationships is that confusion, that if somebody disagrees with me, if somebody says no to something I want from them, there's an immediate kind of like, oh, that means something about the relationship is wrong. And when you manage to access like the listening in yourself, believe me that you don't need to do anything with the other or onto the other or change the other. Just by returning back to listening, it will have an impact on the other. Starting to listening to the other, they can almost feel you listening to them. And then when you listen to the relationship and you deeply connect to that, whatever connects you to, the common shared foundation, they will feel that. And within Aikido, that's often what happens when you step out of the way. So you don't take it personally. You step out of the way, you make space and room, and suddenly there's no surface to attack anymore. There's, even though I might still say the exact same thing, there's nothing to butt head against anymore. There's a very subtle, tangible shift, and that can be felt. And I encourage you to just try that, and really try that without any intention to change or influence the other, but truly, genuinely focusing on yourself and focusing on the listening. And also, you can combine that. I mean, simply by paying attention, or this awareness piece will already shift a lot of things. But like I said, centering is the other bit that will more actively help you to get to that point. So next to listening, as one of the main tools that I'm going to share today, is centering. And if you followed Embodiment Unlimited, you might be aware. I'm going to share the simplest approach to centering. It's a method to basically bring yourself back to a better version of yourself. So it's coming from a fight flight, or like a leaning out of your center in whatever direction that is, if that's running away or moving towards in a fight, back to center through an ABC method. A, awareness, which is a bit of the listening part. It's paying attention to how you are in this very moment. And then B, for balance, whatever that means. If you notice you're leaning forwards in a fight, that can happen. You can even try that with me now. If you go like this, it's like, I'm going to tell you what. If you lean inwards and towards the camera, that can be the attack. If you're like, oh, okay, I don't actually, and you go into defense and run away, that could be a leaning backward. So coming back to a centered upright position, but relaxed, not stiffening, balancing. And then relaxing the core. So relaxing the belly, the chest, the jaw. Very important in conflict. It's like we tense our jaws a lot, and like the entire muscles around our face can contract a lot because it's like there's frustration. And then the tongue in your mouth. That's one of my favorites from Paul Linden. Relaxing the tongue in your mouth. And then becoming aware again of the periphery as well. Because in conflict, it can get very single oriented. Yeah. So that can be a bit more of an active shift for your own system. So if you want to shift out, you notice you're triggered, you notice you're jumping into somewhere where you're just triggered and you can't think straight anymore. That's pretty much what happens. That can help you come back a little bit. And from there, you might start seeing new possibilities. You might suddenly realize, oh, I misunderstood or I misheard what my partner just said. Or you can remind yourself, oh, actually, do I make assumptions here? Or maybe I can retreat back to asking questions, which is another very important thing to do in conflict. Rather than thinking you know what the other wants or what the other is saying, to actually make an effort to understand what they're saying. Which indirectly comes back to listening. If you listen to the other and you notice, I don't actually understand really what they mean, or I think I do, but do you really? And can you allow yourself to maybe become curious? To be like, okay, what I'm hearing is this, but is that actually what you mean? And possibly it's even there will be an opening for you to address that. Underneath the conflict, maybe there's a different aim, a different goal. And maybe you can invite your partner to drop that level deeper. So I think there's a lot of value in agreeing on fighting rules with a partner in times when things are good. So if you're with a romantic partner, with your life partner, or also with friends, you could kind of agree up front what you do during a conflict, what you do during fights. And sometimes it can get so heated that none of the techniques I shared work in the moment. And then you can step away for a moment and do some emotional release. That's the other thing. If you tend to be quite an emotional person, or you have a lot of emotions coming up during conflict, which is totally legitimate, but they might not serve the actual relationship, and that's coming back and seeing the relationship as what matters in that moment. Then if you've agreed on that beforehand, you can just tell your partner, okay, can we have a moment of time out? I need 10 minutes, and then we come back to this conversation. But it needs to be somewhat agreed on, because otherwise the other person might just feel like, oh, you're running away from it. But if it's agreed upon and you take that space, you can go to your own room, really take some space, walk away, go for a walk around the block, and then you can shake or scream into a pillow. These are probably the two best techniques. Getting into movement, shaking or walking, depending on how intense the emotions are, or screaming into a pillow. Because repressing the emotions in the moment will also not lead anywhere. It's like then you start a conflict with yourself, which is often underneath any conflict what is really happening anyway. That it's not necessarily the person you're in conflict with, but your own internal conflict that makes something so difficult. And it could be just the conflict of you wanting to have your opinion heard, but also telling yourself you shouldn't start a fight or you shouldn't that, and to should yourself and to push yourself down, which is basically you're battling two battles at the same time. Then you're like talking to your partner while also kind of talking yourself down, like okay, keep the emotions down, stay calm, which in the end might have the reverse effect. So in times of very intense emotions, that's the third tip. Take a step away, find an expression for that, and acknowledge them as something positive. Because I think what I've learned a lot, and especially as a woman, is it's not okay to express anger. It's not okay to become very emotional, culturally dependent especially. It's not okay to really express or to cry or anything. And also sometimes it can be so strong of a ripple effect then that it can really be detrimental to the conversation, or the person you're in a conflict with might not be able to handle the intensity of the emotions present. And it's just a matter of taking care in that moment of both of you, of the relationship, to find an outlet for yourself, like let a bit of the steam off through a valve and then return. Because there's not necessarily value in screaming at your partner in that very moment, because it might have nothing to do with them most of the time. And after you've expressed the emotional intensity, it's much easier to return back to what is it actually about, to drop deeper. And that's really the invitation, always dropping deeper. So listening, centering, and emotional release. And maybe as a fourth one, it's the reminder to return to what connects you and to drop below, going deeper, 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 deeper. I had a fight with my partner the other day, and there could have been a moment of like me being like, fine, maybe you should leave, and him going like, fine, I'll leave then, and like grabbing his bag, and in that moment I reminded myself, take a breath, listen, what's happening, and went through all these steps. And especially that idea of there is something underneath here that we both want, and we're both frustrated, and what it is actually about is craving some intimacy and connection, but we seem to fail, we seem to mismatch right now. What I did then was address that in the moment. So I self-regulated my own system. I took a breath, I started listening, started taking that step back, and I suddenly saw, whoa, okay, and found a way to express that to my partner as well. And it was like suddenly everything diffused. The escalation, the dramatic sort of outcome kind of went into, okay, yes, there's some truth here, and that what we really, really want is actually connection. And we seem to keep misunderstanding each other. And once we could let go of that top layer and not get into like what you said and like getting into the nitty gritty of, talking, but like, hey, what is underneath that? It was so much better. There's one more thing. Maybe give yourself a shake as well, talking about conflict a lot. I love this topic, but maybe feel free to get up as well if you want. So there's one more thing I want to share before I'm going to open it up for a few questions, which is a more radical view on conflict and our current society. that advocates that we can, or it's okay to seek revenge or become violent or kind of come back to very extreme means that might be harmful to another if we're attacked. And I would say that self-protection, and like if your physical well-being is threatened, like self-protecting is important. First and foremost, that's what we do in the Aikido practice as well. It's like preserving my own health and well-being is important. So if I'm genuinely attacked by someone, first thing, step out of the way. So protecting myself. But what isn't necessarily okay, if not absolutely necessary for your survival, is to go and punch them, to go and harm them, to seek out actively wanting to cause any sort of impact, injure them, seek revenge. And unfortunately, in our culture, this is very, very strongly permitted, if not promoted, in movies, all sorts of movies, that yes, something terrible happened to a person, and then one hero goes out and seeks revenge and kills a bunch of other people. But I would argue that even here, as a collective, we need to drop deeper. And even in Christianity, that's where the turn the other cheek comes into play. And to genuinely practice that is moving towards not taking anything personally, which doesn't negate that there are situations where somebody might have caused you harm and might have violated you. But even in that moment, I believe that it won't help to return that. It won't help to kind of hit back, destroy them, become violent yourself. So, and shifting that perspective is something I'd really love to see happening in the world. Because otherwise we find ourselves in situations that we can see all around us where conflict never ends. Because but this person did this to me, so it's okay if I do that to me. And we see that on national levels, countries being at war for decades. Because there's always somebody that did something that then retribution needs to happen. And then again, and where does it end? So in order to stop that, it's really about returning back to the idea of, if I harm another, I do harm myself. And even if somebody else harms me, in some way this isn't personal. They're in deep pain, they're in a deep, deep nightmare. But then beating them up for it will just continue the cycle forever and forever, 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 forever. And to become the person to say stop, to become the domino that doesn't fall. We used to do this really lovely circle with kids in the Aikido dojo, where we had them stand in one circle, and the one kid starts and you hit on the shoulder and you're supposed to pass it back around, basically. So you keep shoving the person next to you, and at some point it does come back to you. And it was a very sweet way of visualizing or having an experiential sort of sense of how things that you do, and especially if you hurt somebody, it will come back to you. And it has a chain reaction. So if you don't make that choice of stepping out of that, who will? So that's even a much bigger level of like approaching conflict in a different way and taking a conscious choice of as much as you can. And ask yourself, like, where's my personal line that I've had maybe where I okayed in myself, I found it okay to hit back. Like, let's say, oh, if somebody insults my mother, then it's okay. And violence happens on various levels. Like, it can be verbal, it can be physical, it can be so many different ways. So, but question your own line. That belief of like, if that line gets crossed, then it's totally okay for me to. Is it? Maybe shake that. shake that in or off if that's maybe triggering or you disagree. It's okay if you disagree. So, conflict, transforming conflict, changing the view on conflict. Do you have any questions? I'll have a look at the chat now. Yeah, letting go of the urge to protect myself and going deep with that question of what am I actually protecting once brought me to a quite profound realization that in the end, there's nothing really to protect. If anything, it's just the ideas I hold about myself. Would you suggest the listening to self and other and relationship whilst in a conversation? Absolutely, yes. You can practice the listening to self every day as a mini check-in. A lot of the courses we teach give that as a homework to do a regular check-in with yourself, to become more and more familiar and make that more and more of a default. The more you're able to and already kind of programmed yourself to do that, the easier it will become to do these things in a situation when it is required or when it would help you. And definitely in the conversation. It's a bit of a multitasking then, but you will notice that shift. You'll notice that without the intention to change the actual conversation, the conversation will shift as soon as you start listening to yourself, then listening to the other, and listening to the relationship. What would you say about people who thrive, self-regulate through conflict with others? There might be, I'm not sure if I would call it self-regulation, but there might be a confusion that happens, which could have emerged early in childhood already, that this is a way of expressing love or being loved, like through this kind of friction, through fight and conflict. It actually means that somebody cares about me. And if that's something you've learned subconsciously through your family or something in your past, then that might be comforting in these moments. It might be like, ooh, the fight actually means somebody cares about me. Somebody loves me, because otherwise we wouldn't be fighting. So that calms me. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, could I summarize ABC principles again? Yes. So centering, there's a lovely centering ebook out there as well by Mark Walsh that summarizes a bunch of different centering techniques. Look it up on the website. ABC stands for awareness, balance, and core relaxed mainly. But there can be alternations as well. Awareness, becoming aware of your body, your surrounding. Balance is in all directions, balancing your posture, balancing the breath. B could be breath. So up, down, front, right, left, all that. And then C, core relaxed, is really the belly, the entire central line of the body. So relaxing as much as you can, the muscles there. Yeah, when somebody is defensive, in a conflict situation, these things might be difficult to address then. That's why I'm saying sometimes it's actually good when everything seems wonderful and good to have a more neutral conversation about what you do in times of conflict. Because when neither of you is triggered and neither of you is frustrated with anything, but you're actually in a very good place, you can establish ground rules that might serve you then in times of conflict. What's okay. All right, so just to recap, also while I'm doing that, maybe you can share what you take away from this session. What are some of the insights?
In fact, I'd love to invite the people on YouTube as well to leave a comment of what's their biggest takeaway, so that the others on YouTube can see it as well, and I can relate it to you, Christina, here. And while you're typing that, maybe we can go over the announcements, and I'll come back to you, Christina, for your 3 tips. Is that all right? How does that sound?
Yeah.
So even if you don't share it in the comments, the invitation usually is to write down what you're taking away, what stuck out for you at this session, so you can keep coming back to it in your life. Oh, there's some good questions now coming in. I don't know if you want to respond first, Christina. There's a question there from somebody in the chat. It seems very juicy.
What do you mean, Virginia?
The one about how do you respond to somebody who does not let you speak and persistently talks over you?
For me, there are moments like, while I say it's never okay to harm anyone else, like to hit back in that moment, for instance, it's always okay to leave. If a situation isn't bearable, if a situation isn't okay, to remove yourself from that situation. So if somebody keeps talking over you and they really, really don't want to listen, it could be like having very firm boundaries is important as well. To be like, okay, this doesn't lead anywhere. And maybe we can come back together and talk about this when we can actually have a conversation. And then to step away is okay as well. It's one way of self-care. And also there was a comment about abusive situations. It's about removing yourself. It's not about, when conflict emerges, there are ways to handle conflict, but there are situations when it's a dynamic in a relationship that's not healthy, where it's actually probably more important to remove yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And I imagine you go deeper in the course about ways to do that and to be able to do that in that moment, because that's when it counts, right? Because that's what it's about for me. In that moment, like I can have all the tips and take all my notes, but in that moment, it's not so easy for me.
And none of this is aimed at like enduring conflict. None of this. On the contrary, it's about understanding your own responses better and understanding your own body and your own situation better, to like gain a little bit of distance from it. And if the consequence of that is actually leaving a relationship, that might have to happen. But like, yeah, it's not to endure a situation that can't be fixed, that is actually harmful to you because it doesn't respect the relationship.
Thank you for speaking to that. That's important to hear for me. Thank you. And I imagine for others. So there was a lot in the space of less than an hour. So if you do want the replays for this, register in that link that I've pasted in the comments, because we will email you the replays. So in order to access the replays, you do have to register, and then at least you'll have the replays over the weekend of this and all the other sessions during the week. Remember, you can still invite your friends, your family, somebody that you think would really benefit from this, would thank you for it. You'd be giving them a gift. It's a free thing. So do reach out to somebody. In fact, think of someone right now that you can reach out to at the end of this call. Action is important. There is an early bird offer for the Empowered Relationship course, and the early bird will be running until after the replays in the weekend. So you do have plenty of time to think about if it's the right fit for you, if it's something you'd like to get into right now. And I'd like to share my screen here and show you what's in the course so you get a little bit of an idea. So there we go. That's it's an 8-week course, and you can see here we start in week 1 with becoming aware of the body, pleasure, exploring self-care. It's different themes during each week. Let me make this bigger so you can see better. So we go really deeper into these boundaries. That's a big one for me. Desires, needs as opposed to wants. Noticing attraction. Week 5, I think I got the course for week 5, all around attraction and relating. It's very, very juicy for me. Week 6, we have the conflict stuff. Week 7, curiosity and other practices. And we do have sessions with Christina and Adam. You have a range of options while the early bird offer is running. So we have 3 different packages depending on what you'd like to invest and how much time you'd like to invest. And if you're a facilitator or a coach or just want it for personal growth. So the personal practice package normally would go for $549. Now it's $249 only. And you still get a good almost 30 hours of learning. You have the coaches package, which is a little bit more and more freebies thrown in there. It would be $899 normally, but now it will be $399 until the early bird expires. So you have more hours of learning. You have the live tutorials in both cases. You have peer support, which I found is important. Talking with other people that have similar issues and kind of finding common ground and having support from your peers. And then we have the full facilitators package, which is more than 70 hours worth of work. We have live videos, live tutorials. You do get, in that package, you get a one-to-one coaching session with Christina or Adam. You get to pick one. And you have coaching demo videos around intimacy, leadership, and other topics. And that is for $599. And you can find all this in the link that I've shared and will again in the chat. And I wanted to show you quickly what the course looks like. So I've gotten the course. For me, the one main thing was the attractiveness stuff, and the other one was this. When I saw this, I was like, I want it. Taking no shit, a guide to being an ethical asshole. I really, really can't wait for that one, because it's something that I need a lot. But basically, you get into the course and you get weekly webinars. You get also in the full package, you get 10 talks from around intimacy, the 10 best talks from the Embodiment conference, and that's included in the bundle. But let's go to the normal personal development one if you want just a simple version. So you get different stuff every week, and the opportunity to dive deeper into it. So every week you can face yourself. This will become available as you go along, and it builds on each other. I don't know if you want to say something more, Christina. Otherwise, we can come to you for your 3 top tips and something to take away from this session.
No, nothing to add to that. Thank you, Virginia. I think when it comes to conflict, I'm speaking to conflict as in a conversation, a fight, a disagreement on a certain level where the relationship is somewhat still intact. And then listening to self, listening to other, and the relationship is what can bring you into connection. And maybe to make this very explicit once again, I'm not talking about abusive situations when the relationship is already unhealthy and harmful. So then these methods are not what you should do to endure this, let's say it that way, but actually rather walk away because the relationship itself is already not intact. The assumption is that there is a well-intended kind of disagreement, but the intention underneath is actually coming into connection and wanting the best for the other person. Yeah. So otherwise, I'm I teach a lot of boundaries as well, boundary work, and really to have a very strong no and a very strong fuck off is as important. If it doesn't lead anywhere, Sometimes it's about removing yourself. So just to reiterate that. And otherwise, the top tip for conflict to transform it is to start listening. And listening to yourself, that's where it starts. And that's where you can find also what's really going on and what is necessary in the given situation. Yeah. Thank you for all the questions and comments in the chat. It's always good.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody in the Zoom room, in the live stream. Thank you. You've been great company. Remember that we have more sessions coming up. The next one will be in 2 hours from now, and I'll give you a little preview of the rest of the week here. So the next one will be on your cycle and intimacy, and we've got all these lovely goodies coming up for the rest of the week. So do stay tuned, do share with your friends, join us again if you want in a couple of hours. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.